The university library hummed with a low, almost imperceptible energy, the kind that only exists late at night when the building is mostly empty. I was cramming for my finals, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the sheer terror of failing my astrophysics class. By the time I finally packed up my books, it was well past 2 in the morning. The campus was deserted, a ghost town of silent buildings and long, dark shadows. A thick fog had rolled in, clinging to the ground and muffling all sound. It was eerie, but I was too exhausted to care. All I wanted was my bed. My car was in the far corner of Lot C, the one nobody likes because it's poorly lit and bordered by a dense patch of woods. As I walked, my footsteps echoed unnaturally in the heavy silence. The fog swirled around my ankles, making it feel like I was wading through a cloud. That's when I heard it, a faint whistling. It wasn't a human tune. It was a strange, disjointed melody that seemed to rise and fall with the shifting fog. I stopped, straining to listen. The whistling stopped too. I told myself it was just the wind, my tired mind playing tricks on me. I picked up my pace, my keys clutched tightly in my hand. The rows of cars loomed like sleeping beasts in the mist. As I got closer to my section, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing near my beat-up sedan was a figure. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its limbs long and gangly. It stood perfectly still, just a dark silhouette against the faint orange glow of the single working lamppost. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Maybe it was another student or campus security, but the shape was all wrong. It was too tall, too slender. It didn't look human. I ducked behind a large SUV, peering over the hood. The figure hadn't moved. It just stood there, facing my car. A wave of primal fear washed over me. I couldn't see its face, but I felt like it was watching, waiting. The whistling started again, closer this time, and it had a chilling, mocking quality. It sounded like it was coming from right beside me, but the figure hadn't moved an inch. My mind said, this had to be a prank. Some frat guys trying to scare people. But the stillness of the figure, the unnatural quiet of the parking lot, it felt too real. Then, it moved. It didn't walk. It unfolded, its limbs bending at angles that were just wrong. It dropped to all fours with a speed that was terrifyingly fast, its body contorting. It was no longer a tall, thin man, but something else. Something low to the ground, its form obscured by the fog and the darkness. A low, guttural sound, like a growl mixed with a choked whisper, echoed through the lot. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. This wasn't a prank. This was something ancient and predatory. It began to circle the cars, moving with a fluid, predatory grace that reminded me of a coyote, but much larger. It sniffed the air, its head turning jerky and bird-like. It was hunting, and I was trapped. My car, my only escape, was right there, just 100 feet away, but it might as well have been 1,000,000 miles. The creature paused by a minivan, its head cocked as if listening. It then raised one of its long forelimbs and dragged a claw or a nail. I couldn't tell down the side of the vehicle. The screech of metal on metal was deafening in the silence. It was a sound of pure, malicious destruction. I knew I had to do something. Staying here meant being found. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. I looked around desperately. My only chance was to make a run for it, but not for my car. The main campus road was in the opposite direction. If I could get there, maybe I could flag down a passing security patrol. It was a slim chance, but it was better than waiting to be cornered. The creature was now on the other side of the row, momentarily out of my direct line of sight. This was my chance. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, my backpack bouncing wildly. I didn't dare look back. The whistling started again, frantic and angry, and it was right behind me. It was accompanied by the sound of scuttling claws on asphalt, a sound that'll haunt my nightmares forever. I could hear its breathing, a ragged, wheezing sound that was far too close. It was gaining on me. The fog was so thick I could barely see 5 feet in front of me. I just ran towards where I thought the road was, praying I was going in the right direction. Suddenly, a shape loomed out of the mist in front of me. I skidded to a halt, my heart leaping into my throat. It was the figure again. It was standing upright, blocking my path, its long arms hanging limply at its sides. How did it get in front of me? It was just behind me. My mind couldn't process it. It was impossible. It let out a low chuckle, a dry, rasping sound that was a twisted mimicry of human laughter. It took a slow step towards me. I was trapped. I stumbled backward, falling to the ground. I scrambled away, crab walking in the dirt and gravel, my eyes locked on the horrifying figure. As it stepped into the faint light from a distant building, I saw its face for a brief, terrible moment. It was vaguely human, but stretched and distorted. Its eyes were black pits, and its mouth was a wide, lipless slash that stretched too far across its face. And it was smiling, a horrible, knowing smile. It raised a hand and pointed a long, bony finger at me. Then, from the direction of the main road, headlights cut through the fog. A campus security truck was making its rounds. The creature froze, its head snapping towards the light. The smile vanished, replaced by a snarl of pure hatred. In the blink of an eye, it dropped to all fours again and scurried away, disappearing into the woods bordering the parking lot with impossible speed. The security truck pulled up beside me, the officer looking down with a confused and concerned expression. "You all right there? What are you doing out here so late?" I couldn't speak. I could only point a trembling finger towards the dark woods. He shone his powerful flashlight into the trees, but there was nothing there. Just silence and fog. He held me up and drove me back to my dorm, chalking it up to exam stress and an overactive imagination. I never told him what I saw. Who would believe me? The next morning, I went back to the parking lot in the bright, unforgiving light of day. My car was untouched, but the minivan next to where I had been hiding had 3 long, deep gouges scraped down its side, from the front door to the rear fender. The metal was peeled back like a can. I dropped out of my astrophysics class that day. Some things, I realized, are better left unknown. I never stayed at the library late again, and sometimes, when the fog rolls in, I can still hear that faint, mocking whistle on the wind. Thanks for listening. If you have your own story, share it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Stay safe out there. The New Year's celebration in New Orleans had been a blur of music, food, and laughter. My friends and I had spent the night dancing in the French Quarter, the air thick with the smell of beignets and the sound of jazz. As the clock struck midnight and fireworks painted the sky, we felt like we were on top of the world. But the city that had felt so alive and welcoming by night turned strange and unsettling as we made our way back to our rental house in the early hours of the morning. We'd rented an old, beautiful home on the edge of the Garden District. It was the kind of place with sprawling porches and ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. As we stumbled up the driveway, laughing and recapping the night, a sudden silence fell over us. Standing under a dim street lamp just beyond the property line was a figure. It was tall and unnervingly thin, wrapped in what looked like a heavy, dark blanket despite the mild Louisiana night. It was completely still, just watching us. One of my friends, Mark, a born and bred New Orleans local, muttered for us to get inside, his voice tight with an urgency that immediately sobered me up. We didn't question him. We hurried into the house, locking the door behind us. Through the window, I could still see the figure, motionless. It hadn't moved an inch. Mark pulled the curtains shut, his face pale. He told us to stay away from the windows and not to make a sound. He wouldn't explain why. Just kept repeating that we needed to be quiet. The celebratory mood was gone, replaced by a thick, creeping dread. We could hear things outside, a soft, dry scratching against the wooden siding of the house. It moved from one side to the other, slow and deliberate. Then came a whisper, a sound that seemed to slither through the cracks in the old walls. It was a distorted imitation of my friend Sarah's laugh from earlier in the night. It was her laugh, but wrong. It was hollow, stretched, and malicious. Sarah grabbed my arm, her knuckles white. We all heard it. Mark finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. He told us stories his grandmother used to tell him. Stories about things that walked in the swamps and shadows. Things that could steal your voice, your face, your very skin. He called it a rougarou, the local legend, but the way he described it, the imitation, the unnatural stillness, it felt like something else I had read about online. Something far more sinister. Skinwalker? He said they are drawn to loud noises and strong emotions. Our New Year's celebration had been like a beacon in the night. Ours? Pas. Pas. The scratching stopped, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. Then, a new sound, a gentle, rhythmic tapping on the upstairs window in the room where I was supposed to be sleeping. It tapped 3 times, paused, and then tapped 3 times again. None of the trees were close enough to the window to make that sound. No one dared to go upstairs to check. We stayed huddled together in the living room, listening to the house settle and groan around us, every creak making us jump. Just before dawn, a new sound began. It was the voice of a man, calling for help. It sounded faint, like it was coming from the back garden. "Please," it cried. "I think my leg is broken. Can anyone help me?" It sounded so real, so desperate. My friend Chloe, bless her heart, made a move toward the back door, but Mark lunged and pulled her back, clamping a hand over her mouth. He shook his head violently, his eyes wide with terror. We staged put, listening to the pleas get more and more frantic, more and more pitiful, until they abruptly stopped. As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, a fragile sense of relief washed over us. The night's horrors seemed to retreat with the darkness. The house was quiet. We waited until the sun was fully up before Mark unlocked the front door. We peered outside, half expecting to see something, anything, but there was nothing. The street was empty. The yard was undisturbed. It was as if the entire night had been a collective nightmare. We packed our bags in a frantic rush, the silence of the house now feeling oppressive. As I loaded my suitcase into the car, my eyes scanned the edge of the property, where we had first seen the figure. Something was caught on the branch of a low-hanging oak tree. Primea wa. Belakedobe. My heart pounding. It was a piece of dark, coarse of fabric torn from what looked like a heavy blanket or animal hide, and on the soft ground beneath it, there wasn't a human footprint. There was a single, perfect print of a large canine paw, pressed deep into the mud. We drove away from that house and didn't look back. We never spoke of what happened that night in New Orleans again. But sometimes, when it's late and quiet, I can still hear it. That soft, dry scratching. That terrible stolen laughter. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that it saw us. It heard us, and it was just playing with its food. That trip taught me a valuable lesson. Some legends are real, and when you're celebrating in a place with a history as deep and dark as New Orleans, you have to be careful what kind of attention you attract, because you might just invite something ancient and hungry to join the party. Stay safe out there. The flickering fire was my only companion, or so I thought. I'd set up camp deep in the Canadian wilderness, miles from any soul, seeking silence. But the first night, something felt off. The woods, which should have been alive with nocturnal sounds, were dead quiet. I chalked it up to nerves, the city boy in me getting spooked by the vast, dark emptiness. I built my fire, cooked my rations, and settled into my sleeping bag. The stars a brilliant canopy above. The next morning, I woke to a strange sight, about 50 yards from my own. There was another fire pit. It was crude, just a circle of blackened stones, but it was unmistakably new. There were no tracks, no signs of anyone approaching. Primera walekid, over my boots crunching on the frosted ground. The ashes were cold, but not days old. Someone had been here last night. I spent the day on edge, calling out a few times, hoping for a friendly response from a fellow hiker. Only the wind answered. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe another camper had passed through silently in the night. That evening, I made my fire bigger, a primal instinct to ward off the unknown. I tried to read, but my eyes kept darting to the empty space where the new fire pit sat. Sleep was a long time coming. When I woke on the second morning, my blood ran cold. Next to the strange fire pit, there was now a bedroll. It was old and weathered, made of what looked like deer hide, neatly rolled and tied with sinew. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a deliberate, creeping intrusion. I yelled out, my voice cracking. "Hello? Is anyone there?" This isn't funny. The silence that followed was heavier than before, suffocating. I packed a day bag, grabbed my compass and a flare gun, and decided to scout the area. I had to know who was playing this sick game. I spent hours circling my camp in ever-widening loops, searching for any sign of human life, a broken twig, a footprint, anything. I found nothing. The forest floor was undisturbed, as if my phantom neighbor had simply materialized out of thin air. Returning to camp as dusk began to bleed through the trees, I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I was being watched. I knew it with a certainty that defied logic. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against a thick pine, my hunting knife clutched in my hand, staring into the oppressive darkness beyond my fire's glow. My ears strained, picking up every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, attributing them to the thing that was tormenting me. The third morning was the worst. A new addition had joined the phantom campsite, a makeshift lean-to, constructed from fallen branches and lashed together with more sinew, stood beside the bedroll, and hanging from a low branch nearby was a small, tattered leather pouch. I didn't want to look, but I had to. My hands trembled as I untied the pouch. Inside were 3 small, smooth, white stones. Just stones. But they felt significant, like a marker, a claim. I was no longer just a visitor in these woods. I was part of something, an unwilling participant in a ritual I didn't understand. The silence was the most terrifying part. A forest this large should have birds, squirrels, something, but there was nothing. It was as if all life had fled, leaving just me and my silent, unseen companion. Panic began to set in. My plan of a peaceful week-long retreat was shattered. My only thought now was to get out. I decided to pack up and leave at first light the next day. I couldn't bear another night of this slow, creeping horror. That evening, I barely ate. My fire felt small and inadequate, the darkness pressing in from all sides. My eyes were glued to the other campsite, half expecting to see a figure step out of the shadows and take a seat by the cold fire pit. But nothing moved. That night, a storm rolled in. The wind howled through the trees like a tormented spirit, and rain lashed against my tent. Sleep was impossible. Every time a branch scraped against the nylon, I flinched, thinking it was finally here. Around what must have been 3 a.m., I heard a sound that made my soul freeze. It was a voice, carried on the wind, but it wasn't a human voice. It was thin, reedy, and it was mimicking me. It was repeating the words I had yelled out 2 days earlier. "Hello, is anyone there?" But it warped my voice, stretching the syllables, making it sound like a pained, desperate plea. Then it started laughing, a dry, rattling sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. I scrambled for my flare gun, my fingers fumbling with the latch. I didn't know what I was going to shoot at, but I had to do something. The mimicking started again, this time closer. It was my own voice, twisted into a grotesque parody, whispering just outside my tent. I couldn't take it anymore. I burst out of the tent, flare gun raised, and fired into the darkness. The red light illuminated the clearing in a hellish glow, and for a split second, I saw it. It was standing by the lean-to, impossibly tall and gaunt, its limbs long and spidery. Its skin was the color of ash, stretched tight over a skeletal frame, and its head was like a deer's skull, bleached white, with gaping black sockets where eyes should have been. It turned its head towards me, and even though it had no eyes, I felt its gaze pierce me. The flare died, plunging me back into darkness. I didn't wait. I abandoned everything, my tent, my pack, all my gear. I just ran. I ran blindly through the storm-thrashed woods, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning. The rattling laughter and the sound of my own stolen voice echoed behind me, sometimes seeming to come from right beside me, then from high up in the trees. I didn't know how long I ran for. Hours, it must have been. I tripped and fell countless times, but I always scrambled back up, fueled by sheer terror. I ran until the sun came up, until I stumbled out of the woods and onto a dirt logging road. I followed it for what felt like an eternity until the truck finally found me. I was a wreck, scratched, bruised, and babbling incoherently about a campsite that grew and a voice that stole my own. The driver thought I was crazy, but he gave me a ride to the nearest town. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? They'd say I was hallucinating, that the isolation got to me. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right, I can still hear it. My own voice, whispering from the darkness.
Hello? Is anyone there?
It's a reminder that I left a part of myself back in those woods, at the campsite that kept expanding. And I know, with chilling certainty, that something is still there, waiting by its fire pit, adding to its collection, waiting for the next visitor. Don't go looking for silence in the deep woods. You might find it, but it's a hungry, watchful silence, and it might just decide to make you a permanent part of its collection. Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more tailies from the edge of the map. Stay safe out there.
My name is Rachel, and what I'm about to tell you happened just last year. I still wake up screaming sometimes. It was a cold November night, and I was staying over at my boyfriend Alex's house. His parents were out of town, so we had the place to ourselves. We were watching a movie in his upstairs bedroom when I realized I'd left my phone charging downstairs in the living room. I told Alex I'd be right back and quietly made my way down the stairs. The house was old, the kind that creaks and groans with every step, but tonight the silence felt different. It was heavy, oppressive. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, a sliver of moonlight cut through the living room window, illuminating a shape that wasn't there before. A figure was standing in the middle of the room, perfectly still, its back to me. My heart leaped into my throat. At first, I thought it was Alex's dad. Maybe he'd come home early. I was about to call out his name, but I froze. Something was terribly wrong. The figure was too tall, too thin. Its limbs were unnaturally long, bent at angles that didn't seem humanly possible. It was wearing what looked like Alex's dad's favorite flannel shirt, but it hung off its gaunt frame like a scarecrow's rags. I stayed hidden in the shadows of the staircase, my breath caught in my chest. The figure slowly, deliberately turned its head. It wasn't a full turn, just enough for me to see its profile in the dim light. The face, it wasn't human. It was long and narrow, like an animal's snout, but stretched and distorted into a grotesque mockery of a human face. Its eyes glowed with a faint, predatory light, scanning the room. I felt a primal fear, a terror so absolute it rooted me to the spot. This thing wasn't an intruder. It was something else entirely, something ancient and malevolent. Then it started to move. It didn't walk. It sort of unfolded itself, its joints cracking and popping with a sound like dry branches snapping. It crawled on all fours, but its movements were fluid and impossibly fast, more like a spider than any mammal I'd ever seen. It skittered across the floor, its long fingers tipped with what looked like dirty, broken claws scratching against the hardwood. It moved with a terrifying purpose, sniffing the air, its head darting from side to side. It was hunting, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it was hunting for me. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get back upstairs to Alex, but my legs wouldn't obey. The creature paused directly below the staircase, its head tilting back as if it sensed me. It let out a low, guttural sound, a mix between a growl and a dry, rasping cough, and then it spoke. In a voice that was a perfect chilling imitation of Alex's dad, it whispered, "Rachel, is that you, sweetheart? Come on down, don't be shy." The sound of my name in that stolen voice shattered my paralysis. I scrambled backward up the stairs, trying to be silent, but my foot slipped and I let out a small, terrified gasp. The thing below went silent. Then I heard it, a rapid, frantic scratching sound coming straight for the stairs. I didn't look back. I flew up the remaining steps, burst into Alex's room, and slammed the door shut, fumbling with the lock. Alex jumped up, startled. "Rachel, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't form words. I just pointed at the door, my body trembling uncontrollably. He looked confused, but my sheer terror must have convinced him. He pushed his heavy dresser in front of the door just as something slammed against it from the other side. The impact shook the entire frame. It wasn't a human punch or kick. It was a heavy, deadweight thud, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Then came the scratching, frenzied and desperate, all over the door, and the voice. It started mimicking Alex's mom. "Alex, honey, let us in. Something's wrong with your father." Then it switched to Alex's voice. "Rachel, babe, open the door, it's me." And out here, we huddled in the corner of the room, listening to the cacophony of stolen voices, each one a perfect mimicry, pleading, crying, and then growling with frustration. It was trying to lure us out, to trick us. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, the sounds from behind the door shifting and changing. Sometimes it would go quiet and we'd hold our breath, praying it was gone. Then the scratching would start again, more furious than before. At one point, we heard a faint whimpering sound, like a small lost animal. It was the most unnerving sound of all because it felt like a trap, a calculated attempt to play on our sympathies. We didn't fall for it. Alex had his phone, and with shaking hands, he managed to call the police, whispering our location and what was happening. He didn't say it was a monster. He just said someone was trying to break into the room and they weren't human. The wait for the police was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The creature outside seemed to know they were coming. The noises grew more frantic, the banging more violent. It sounded like it was trying to tear the door from its hinges. Then, just as we heard the distant wail of sirens, everything stopped. The scratching, the banging, the voices, all of it just ceased. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise. We stayed pressed against the far wall, not daring to move, until we heard the police shouting from downstairs. When they finally got to us, they had to break down what was left of the bedroom door. The hallway was a wreck. The door was covered in deep, long scratches, and the wood around the lock was completely splintered. But there was no sign of anyone or anything. They searched the entire house, top to bottom. The living room was untouched, except for the front door, which was wide open, letting the cold night air in. There were strange, muddy tracks leading out into the backyard, but they were distorted, not quite animal, not quite human. They vanished at the edge of the woods behind the house. Alex's parents came home the next day to a police investigation and 2 traumatized kids. We tried to explain what we saw, what we heard. They believed we'd been targeted by a very disturbed intruder, but Alex and I knew better. He'd grown up hearing local legends, old stories from the nearby reservation about shapeshifters, beings that could steal a person's voice, their appearance. They were called skinwalkers. We never told his parents the full truth. How could we? How do you tell someone that a creature from a nightmare tried to hunt you in their own home? I never stayed the night at Alex's house again. We eventually broke up, not because we stopped caring, but because we could never look at each other without seeing the fear in our eyes, without remembering that night. Sometimes when I'm alone in the quiet, I can still hear it. That dry, rasping cough. That perfect imitation of a familiar voice. And I know, deep down, that it's still out there, walking in someone else's skin, waiting in the dark. So if you ever hear a strange noise downstairs or a voice that sounds just a little bit off, stay in your room, lock the door, and pray it doesn't know your name. Thanks for listening, and please be careful out there.
The Trans-Canada Highway. They say it's the backbone of the country, a ribbon of asphalt stretching through some of the most beautiful and desolate landscapes on Earth. For me, my brother Liam, and our friends Chloe and Mark, it was supposed to be the ultimate road trip, a final adventure before college scattered us to the four winds. We'd planned it for months, dreaming of starry nights, crackling campfires, and the untamed beauty of the Canadian Rockies. We had no idea we were driving straight into a nightmare, one that would stain those pristine landscapes with a primal, suffocating fear. Our journey started with laughter and The first few days were idyllic. We hiked to turquoise lakes, snapped photos of majestic elk, and felt a million miles from civilization. The trouble began somewhere in northern Ontario, on a stretch of highways so remote that radio stations dissolved into static, and the only signs of life were the endless walls of pine and birch trees. We were running low on gas, the needle hovering precariously over empty. According to our map, a small town called Silver Creek was just a few miles ahead, but miles on these roads feel longer, heavier. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. That's when we saw it, a deer, standing frozen in the middle of the road. Mark, who was driving, slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest. The deer didn't flinch. It just stared at us, its eyes wide with something that looked less like fear and more like a chilling, vacant or... Then, as quickly as it appeared, it bolted into the dense forest. We all let out a collective breath, laughing nervously. Mark joked about it being a ghost deer, a bad omen. We had no idea how right he was. We finally limped into Silver Creek as dusk settled into a deep, inky night. The town was strange. A single gas station, a rundown diner, and a few houses with darkened windows. It felt like a place forgotten by time. An old man with a face like a road map of wrinkles filled our tank. He didn't say much, just eyed our car and our out-of-province plates with a look of deep suspicion. Or maybe it was pity. When Liam asked him if there was a good place to camp nearby, the old man's expression hardened. He just shook his head, muttering something under his breath that sounded like "Don't stray from the road. The woods have an appetite." We brushed it off as the ramblings of a lonely old local trying to spook some city kids. We paid for the gas and drove on, eager to leave the unsettling quiet of Silver Creek behind. A few miles out of town, we found what looked like a perfect spot. A small, unmarked dirt road that led to a clearing by a serene, glass-like lake. It was exactly what we'd been looking for. We set up our tents, started a fire, and soon the warmth and the crackle of the flames pushed the eerie vibe of the town to the back of our minds. Chloe started telling ghost stories, her voice a dramatic whisper in the darkness. We laughed and shrieked in all the right places, wrapped in the cozy illusion of safety our little campfire provided. But as the night deepened, a different kind of chill began to settle over us, one that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. It started with a sound, a faint snapping of a twig from the woods just beyond the firelight. We all froze. "Probably just a squirrel," Mark said, trying to sound nonchalant, but then we heard it again, closer this time. Snap. A heavy, deliberate sound. Not a small animal. Liam grabbed the big flashlight, its powerful beam cutting a swath through the darkness. The light danced over the trees, revealing nothing but shifting shadows and silent trunks. We held our breath, listening. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the fire and our own ragged breathing. Then, a new sound echoed across the lake. A voice. It was faint, distorted, and sounded impossibly like Chloe's mother. It was calling her name. "Chloe. Honey, where are you?" We all stared at Chloe, whose face had gone pale. That's impossible," she stammered. "My mom's in Vancouver." The voice called again, laced with a desperate, pleading tone. It was a perfect imitation, right down to the slight tremor we knew her mother had when she was worried. It was a cruel, chilling mimicry. A cold dread, sharp and painful, pierced through me. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't an animal. The old man's words echoed in my mind. The woods have an appetite. Panic began to set in. Mark insisted we pack up and leave immediately. No one argued. We moved with a frantic, clumsy urgency, stuffing sleeping bags into sacks and collapsing tents. The whole time, the woods were alive with sounds. We heard whispers, fragments of conversations we'd had earlier in the car. We heard the faint sound of a baby crying, a sound so full of sorrow it made my teeth ache. It was a symphony of psychological warfare, designed to fray our nerves and lure us into the darkness. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves, felt like a predator circling, toying with its prey. As we scrambled to throw the last of our gear into the back of the SUV, a new, more terrifying sound emerged. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground we stood on. It was a sound of pure hunger, of ancient, insatiable starvation. And then, from the edge of the woods, something moved. It was tall, impossibly tall and gaunt, its frame skeletal and raw. It unfolded itself from between two large pine trees like a nightmarish contortionist. Its skin was the color of ash, stretched tight over bones that seemed too long, too sharp. Its head was crowned with what looked like a deer's skull, the antlers branching out like a grotesque crown. But the worst part was its eyes. They glowed with a faint, malevolent light like dying embers in the dark. They weren't the eyes of an animal. They were intelligent, and they were filled with a hatred as old as the mountains themselves. We didn't scream. The fear was too profound, too suffocating for sound. We just piled into the car, fumbling with doors and seatbelts. Mark jammed the key into the ignition, his hands shaking so violently it took him 3 tries to turn it. The engine roared to life, and he slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the dirt, spraying gravel everywhere. The creature took a step forward, its long, spindly legs moving with an unnerving, jerky grace. It was fast, terrifyingly fast. Mark wrenched the wheel, and we fishtailed back onto the dirt road, speeding away from the clearing. I dared to glance into the side mirror. The thing was running, keeping pace with us easily. It moved on all 4s now, a spider-like scuttle that was both silent and horrifyingly swift. Its head was low to the ground, the glowing eyes fixed on us. It wasn't chasing us to catch us. It was hurting us, enjoying the terror. I yelled at Mark to go faster, my voice cracking. We burst back onto the main highway, the tires squealing on the pavement. Mark floored it, pushing the SUV to its limit. The speedometer needle climbed, but every time I looked back, I could still see those 2 faint pinpricks of light in the distance, keeping a steady, patient pace. The mimicry started again, this time inside our heads. We heard the voices of our loved ones, begging us to stop, telling us we were going the wrong way, that we'd left someone behind. It was a desperate, insidious attack on our sanity. We had to fight to ignore it, to focus on the single ribbon of road ahead, our only lifeline. We drove for what felt like an eternity, the engine screaming in protest. We didn't speak, we just stared ahead. The shared trauma, a heavy blanket in the car. Finally, as the first hint of dawn began to break, staining the eastern sky a fragile gray, I looked back one last time. The lights were gone. We had outrun it, or, more likely, it had simply let us go. It had had its fun. We didn't stop until we reached the outskirts of a major city, the rising sun revealing a world that felt blessedly normal, filled with morning commuters and coffee shops. We never talked about what happened. Not really. How do you put words to a horror that defies explanation? How do you tell someone you were hunted by a legend, a nightmare born of starvation and winter? We finished our road trip in near silence. The easy friendship we once shared now fractured by a shared, unspoken terror. Years have passed. We all went our separate ways, as planned, but the road trip bound us together in a way we never intended. Sometimes, on a cold, quiet night, I can still hear it. The snap of a twig, the whisper of my name on the wind. I avoid the woods now. I stay on well-lit streets. Because I know what's out there, in the deep, dark, and hungry parts of the world. And I know that the Wendigo is patient. It has all the time in the world. And it never, ever forgets the taste of fear. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe out there. The silence of the deep woods at night is something you never really get used to. It's not just quiet, it's heavy. You can feel it pressing in on you. My name is Mark, and I was part of a 4-man search and rescue team. We were on what was supposed to be a routine patrol, checking some old trails deep in a national forest known for its strange disappearances. It was me, Dave, Sam, and our team lead, Ben. The night was moonless, and our headlamps cut sharp, lonely beams through the thick, ancient trees. We'd been walking for about 3 hours, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves under our boots and the occasional hoot of an owl. That's when Sam suddenly stopped, Ehus Frus holding up a hand. We all stopped behind him, instantly on alert. "What is it?" Ben whispered, his voice tight. Sam didn't answer right away. He just slowly raised his headlamp, pointing it up into the canopy of a massive oak tree about 50 yards ahead. At first, I saw nothing but leaves and branches. Then, I saw them. 2 points of light, shining back at us. They weren't the soft, reflective glow of a raccoon or an owl. This was different. It was a direct, intelligent shine, like tiny, bright embers floating in the dark. And they were high, way too high for any normal animal. They had to be at least 15, maybe 20 feet up. "What is that?" Dave murmured, his voice trembling slightly. No one had an answer. The eyes just watched us, unblinking. There was a stillness to them, a predatory patience that sent a cold spike of fear right through my chest. Ben, ever the professional, raised his radio. "Base, this is Patrol 1. We have a visual on something ... unusual. Stand by." As Ben spoke, the eyes blinked. It was a slow, deliberate blink, and then they were gone. Just vanished. We all stood there, our lights frantically scanning the branches where they'd been. Nothing. It was like they had just dissolved into the darkness. A heavy, nervous silence fell over our group. Sam finally lowered his light, his face pale in the glow. "Did you guys see that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. They were too far apart to be an animal, and too high. We tried to rationalize it, a trick of the light, maybe. Some strange reflection, but we all knew what we saw. The feeling in the air had changed. The woods no longer felt empty. They felt like we were being watched. Ben made the call. "All right, team. Let's keep moving, but stay sharp." Eyes open, we continued on, but the easy rhythm of our patrol was gone. Now, every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves made us jump. Our headlamps were constantly darting up into the trees. About 20 minutes later, we heard it. A sound from behind us, off the trail. It was a soft snap, like a dry twig breaking under a heavy foot. We all spun around, light sweeping the undergrowth. Again, nothing. Probably just a deer, Dave said, though he didn't sound convinced. But the sound wasn't like a deer. It was too careful, too stealthy. It felt like something was following us, shadowing our every move, staying just out of sight. Ben motioned for us to stop again. He held a finger to his lips, signaling for absolute silence. We cut our lights and stood in the suffocating darkness, listening. For a full minute, there was nothing but the sound of our own ragged breathing. Then we heard it again, closer this time. A soft, shuffling sound in the leaf litter. It was moving parallel to us, keeping pace. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the four-legged gait of a coyote or a bear. It sounded like something walking on 2 legs, but trying not to be heard. A wave of pure, primal fear washed over me. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Ben clicked his light back on, and we followed suit, our beams cutting through the dark, like swords. We scanned the trees, the bushes, everywhere. The shuffling stopped the moment our lights came on. The woods fell silent again, but the feeling of being watched was now overwhelming. It was a physical presence, a pressure in the air. "Okay," Ben said, his voice strained but steady. "Change of plan. We're heading back to the rendezvous point, now." "Stick close." There was no argument. We turned around and started walking back the way we came, much faster this time. We moved in a tight diamond formation, our backs to each other, our lights covering every angle. The fear was a living thing now, crawling up our spines. We hadn't gone more than 100 yards when Sam let out a choked gasp. "Up there!" To the right. He pointed his light back up into the trees, and there they were again. The same two burning eyes, watching us. This time, they were closer, maybe only 30 yards away, and still just as high. They stared down at us, filled with a cold, ancient intelligence. As we watched it frozen in terror, a low sound drifted down from the canopy. It was a voice, or something that sounded almost like a voice. It was a low, guttural whisper, mimicking the static from Ben's radio. It was a perfect, chilling imitation of the crackle and hiss. Then, it mimicked Ben's voice, distorted and stretched. "Base, this is Patrol 1. Stand by." The words were warped, spoken in a cadence that was deeply, fundamentally, inhuman. It was like something was trying to learn our language by listening to us, and it was getting it terrifyingly right. That's when we broke. The last thread of our composure snapped. We didn't even yell. We just ran. It was a frantic, desperate scramble through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces. We abandoned the trail, just trying to put distance between us and that thing. Behind us, we could hear it. It was no longer being stealthy. It was crashing through the woods, keeping pace with us effortlessly. The sound was horrifying, a heavy thud of 2 feet, combined with a strange clicking and snapping, like bones reconfiguring with every step, and the voice he'd followed. Who's calling out in our own voices? It mimicked Dave's nervous murmur from earlier. "What is that?" It mimicked my own breathy question. It was toying with us, a cat playing with terrified mice. We ran blindly, fueled by pure adrenaline. I remember tripping and falling, my headlamp flying off. For a second, I was plunged into total darkness, the monstrous sounds getting closer. Sam grabbed my arm and hauled me to my feet, and we kept running. We burst out of the tree line and into a small clearing where we'd parked our truck. We fumbled with the doors, piled in, and Ben slammed his foot on the gas. The tires squealed as we tore out of there, leaving the dark woods behind. We didn't speak for the entire drive back to base. We just sat there, shaking, covered in scratches and sweat. The memory of those eyes burned into our minds. When we finally got back, we tried to explain what happened. Our supervisor listened, his face grim. He'd heard stories like ours before. Local legends of the area spoke of them. Creatures that could mimic voices, that could change their shape. Things that were once men, but were now something else entirely. They called them None of us ever patrolled in those woods at night again. I left the search and rescue team a few months later. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, even now, when I'm outside at night, I find myself looking up into the trees, half expecting to see 2 burning eyes looking back at me from the darkness. The woods hold secrets, ancient and terrible secrets, and some of them have eyes that watch you from the shadows. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more Tales from the Dark. Stay safe out there. The blizzard hit without warning, a white wall of fury that swallowed the highway whole. One minute I was cruising down a remote stretch of road in northern Montana. The next my world was reduced to a swirling vortex of snow and wind. My car skidded, spun, and finally came to a dead stop in a snowdrift, the engine sputtering into silence. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than anything I'd ever known. Stranded, the word echoed in the sudden, bone-chilling cold of the cabin. My phone had no signal, of course. The sensible thing was to stay put, waited out. But as hours bled into an eternity and the car grew colder than a tomb, a primal fear began to gnaw at me. The wind outside wasn't just howling anymore. It was screaming. And mixed within that scream, I started to hear something else. A rhythmic, crunching sound. Footsteps. At first, I dismissed it as my mind playing tricks, the product of cold and anxiety. But the sound grew closer. More distinct crunch. 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 It was slow, deliberate, and heavy. Too heavy for any animal I could think of. I peered through the frost-laced windshield, my breath misting in the frigid air. The visibility was almost zero, just a shifting curtain of white. But then, a shape began to resolve in the chaos. Tall, impossibly tall, and gaunt. It moved with an unnatural, jerky gait, its long limbs bending at angles that were just wrong. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the screaming wind. This wasn't a person. It couldn't be. The figure stopped about 50 feet from my car, a dark silhouette against the blinding snow. It just stood there, motionless, as if it were watching me, waiting. I couldn't see a face, no features, just this towering, skeletal outline. A cold dread, colder than the blizzard itself, washed over me. I'd read the old stories, the local legends whispered around campfires, tales of a spirit born of starvation and winter, a creature with an insatiable hunger. The Wendigo. I ducked down below the dashboard, my body trembling uncontrollably. Every instinct screamed at me to stay hidden, to not make a sound. The crunching started again, but this time it was faster, circling the car. I could hear it sniffing, long, guttural inhalations. It sounded impossibly close. It scraped against the metal of the driver's side door, a sound like nails dragging down a chalkboard that sent shivers down my spine. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would go away, that this was all just a fever dream brought on by the cold. But then came a new sound, a low, rasping voice that seemed to whisper directly into my ear, even through the thick metal and glass. It wasn't speaking words, but it was mimicking something. It was mimicking the voice of the radio dispatcher I'd heard an hour before my car died. The same the same cadence, but twisted, distorted, filled with a hollow hunger that made my blood run cold. It was learning. It was luring. The scraping stopped. The whispering ceased. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind and my own ragged breathing. I risked a peek over the dashboard. The silhouette was gone. Relief, so potent it almost made me dizzy, flooded through me. Maybe it had lost interest. Maybe it had moved on. Slowly, cautiously, I sat up, my eyes scanning the whiteout in every direction. Nothing. Just the endless, swirling snow. I let out a shaky breath, the tension in my shoulders easing just a fraction. That's when my rear window shattered. A shower of safety glass exploded inwards, and a long, gray, stick-like arm shot into the car. It wasn't an arm. Not really. It was more like a gnarled tree branch, tipped with yellowed, talon-like claws. It flailed wildly, blindly, clawing at the headrests, ripping the upholstery. I scrambled over the center console and into the passenger seat, pressing myself against the door as far as I could get. The thing outside let out a shriek of frustration, a sound that was a horrific mix of a human scream and an animal's cry of rage. It pulled its limb back out, and then the car began to rock violently, back and forth, as if a giant hand was shaking it. The rocking was rhythmic, powerful, and with each lurch, I could hear the groaning of metal. It was trying to flip the car, to crack it open like a nut. Panic gave way to a desperate survival instinct. I had to get out. I had to run, while the car was being shaken from the driver's side. I fumbled with the passenger door handle. It was frozen shut. I slammed my shoulder against it. Once, twice, a third time with a desperate sob. It burst open and I fell out into the deep snow, the cold a brutal shock to my system. I didn't look back. Just ran. I plunged into the blizzard, the snow up to my thighs, each step a monumental effort. The wind tore at me, stinging my face. But the fear propelled me forward. Behind me, I heard a thunderous crash as my car was finally overturned, followed by that same unearthly shriek. This time closer, much closer. I ran blindly, with no sense of direction, just away from the crunching footsteps that were now pounding through the snow behind me. I could hear its breathing, a harsh, wheezing sound that was getting louder with every second. It was toying with me. It could have caught me in an instant, but it was drawing out the chase, savoring the fear. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. I stumbled and fell, face first into the snow. I rolled over, exhausted, defeated, and there it was, looming over me. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. Its skin was the color of gray, decaying bark stretched taut over a frame of bones that seemed ready to burst through. Its head was like that of a starved stag, with jagged, broken antlers, but its face was a horrifying parody of a human's. Sunken, black eyes burned with an ancient, malevolent intelligence, and its mouth was a lipless slash filled with yellowed, pointy teeth. A foul, sweet smell of decay and frost rolled off it in waves. It lowered its head, its cavernous mouth opening, and it spoke. But this time, it wasn't the radio it was my own voice. It whispered my name, perfectly mimicking my own terrified whimper from moments before. As it lunged, a sudden, blinding light cut through the blizzard. A roaring sound filled the air, and the Wendigo recoiled, shielding its terrible face with one of its spindly arms. It was the headlights of a snowplow, its massive blade just feet from where I lay. The driver must have seen the commotion. The creature let out a final, piercing hiss of pure hatred that was nearly lost in the engine's roar, and then it simply dissolved back into the swirling snow, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The plow driver, a man with a weathered face and terrified eyes, helped me into his warm cab. He didn't ask what I saw. He just said, "Some storms. They bring things out of the woods, things that are best left there." I never drove that road again. Sometimes, on cold winter nights, when the wind howls, I think I can hear it. A faint crunching in the snow, and a whisper in my own voice, calling my name from the darkness. The hunger of the Wendigo is eternal, and it knows my name now. It's waiting for the next blizzard. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more Tales from the Shadows. Stay safe out there. The signal from weather station Delta went dead at 2:13 a.m. One moment, it was transmitting standard atmospheric data from the desolate forest tundra border of northern Manitoba. The next, just static. For 12 hours, the command center tried to re-establish contact. Nothing. A 3-man search and rescue team was dispatched by helicopter. The pilot, a veteran named Marcus, knew these lands. He'd seen strange things, but he never spoke of them. As they approached the coordinates, the station came into view. A small, fortified structure built to withstand the harshest Canadian winters. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The main security door, a slab of reinforced steel designed to open outward, was bent inward, hanging off its hinges like a broken jaw. It looked like a giant had punched its way through solid metal. The team, armed and on high alert, entered cautiously. The interior was a scene of pure chaos. Equipment was smashed, papers were strewn everywhere, and a thick, coppery smell hung in the air. On a shattered monitor, a single, frozen image remained. A grainy, distorted shape, impossibly tall and thin, with eyes that seemed to glow even in the black and white feed. The station's lone meteorologist, Dr. Alistair Finch, was nowhere to be found. The team spread out. One of the rescuers, a young guy named Liam, called out from the small living quarters. On the floor, next to an overturned bed, was Finch's journal. The last few entries were scrolled in a frantic, barely legible hand. The first of these entries, dated 3 days prior, was unsettling. "The wind doesn't stop," Finch wrote. "It sounds hungry, and it carries a voice, a whisper. It knows my name." The next day's entry was worse. Saw it last night, at the edge of the tree line. Tall. So tall. Its limbs were too long, its movements unnatural, like a broken branch swaying in a storm. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't human. It was just wrong. The local Cree legends call it the Wendigo, the spirit of the lonely places. I thought it was just a story. The final entry was just a few hours before the station went silent. The writing was a mess, stained with what looked like frozen condensation or tears. It's been circling the station for hours. I can hear its claws scraping against the metal. That sound, it's the sound of a fork scraping an empty plate. It's taunting me. The hunger. I can feel it through the walls. It's not just for flesh. It's a hunger for warmth, for life itself. The generator just sputtered out. The cold is seeping in, but the cold outside is nothing compared to the cold that's coming for me. It's no longer whispering my name. It's screaming it. Suddenly, a blood-curdling screech echoed from the woods outside, a sound that ripped through the silence of the tundra. It was a mix between a human scream and an animal's cry of agony. The rescue team froze, their blood turning to ice. Marcus, the pilot, spoke into his radio, his voice trembling. "Get out of there. Now. Whatever was here, it's still here." They backed out of the station, weapons raised, eyes scanning the endless expanse of skeletal trees and snow. As they retreated toward the helicopter, Liam glanced back at the ruined doorway. For a split second, framed in the jagged opening, he saw it, a towering, emaciated figure, pale as bone, with antlers that seemed to tear at the sky. Its eyes were two burning coals in the encroaching twilight, and as the helicopter lifted off, leaving the dead station behind, they all heard it one last time, a faint, desolate whisper carried on the wind, a single, horrifying word that would haunt their dreams forever. Hungry. Dr. Alistair Finch was never found. The official report cited an animal attack, a freak polar bear incident. But the rescue team knew the truth. They knew that in the vast, empty north, some legends aren't just stories. They're waiting. They're patient. And they're always hungry. Every winter, when the wind howls and the nights grow long, old-timers in the remote towns of Manitoba will tell you to stay inside. They'll tell you to feed your fire and ignore the scratching at your door. Because the Wendigo walks, and once it knows your name, it will never stop hunting. The story of Delta 7 became a hushed, cautionary tale. A ghost story told by pilots and rangers. They say that sometimes, on a clear night, if you fly over those coordinates, you can see a single, faint light blinking in the darkness. But no one dares to get close enough to see what it is. No one wants to find out if something is still there, waiting in the cold, forever hungry. They say the wind in that part of the world still carries a voice. A desperate, fading whisper that sounds a lot like Dr. Finch, warning anyone who gets too close to turn back. But beneath that whisper, if you listen closely, you can hear another sound. A deeper, older sound. The sound of something that has been hungry for a very, very long time and has only just had a taste. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you do unmiss our next descent into darkness. Stay safe out there.